was an exciting time in Glasgow, and I did all start with the Postcard record label. That was the thing that was a big influence on us, the Orange Juice in particular. But their whole thing was that we can do this in Glasgow. We can make records here. We can stay based here. We can start a record label here. We could do it all in the city. We don't have to go to London, because before that, people would generally go to London because that's where the music business was. And I think post-punk, it happened in cities all over the world, but certainly in the UK, the post-punk period was amazing. Things were happening in Manchester and in Leeds, with the Gang of Four and all those bands. So it wasn't just all based in London. Things were popping up all over the country. And so in Glasgow, it happened to be Postcard Records. And so that was a big, big influence in all of these people that you're talking about, the Vaselines, Eugene from Vaselines and Francis, and the Pastels and the BMX Bandits and all, whatever. So I guess, like I say, they were saying, you can stay in the city, you can make great music, and, and you could, there are clubs here, we can have a scene, and then we can take it from here and go out to other places with it. And so that was really the start of it all, Postcard Records. From there came Primal Scream and Belle and Sebastian, ourselves, the Jesus and Mary chain. That was the springboard really for all of that music. And it was an exciting time, I think before that, I think I mentioned before, but I should probably say again, just in case that stuff's gone, that people in the past would tend to make demos, send them to major record labels. The record label would write back and say, well, these songs are okay. Could you send us some more? Or you might want to try and do this or do that or whatever. And, and we hated the idea of doing that. There was a big culture of that around the time when we started the band. So what we did was we thought that we would just make a record. We didn't have a lot of money, but we booked a day or 2 days in the studio in Glasgow, and we recorded what would be the first Teenage Fanclub LP. And so, that was done in a couple of days. I think we did it in 2 sessions, actually. We did this initial bit of recording, and then I gave the tapes of that to Stephen from the Pastels, who sent that on to his friend Gerard Cosloy, who was in the process of setting up Matador Records. He had been working at Homestead, and he wanted to set up his own label. And so him and Chris Lombardi set up Matador. And Stephen sent the tape to Gerard, and he liked it a lot, and said, look, we'd like to put that out as one of the first releases on Matador. I think it's the second album on Matador. I think it's second or third. It's pretty early. So anyway, we sent that stuff off. Gerard loved it. And then we went to Peter Hook's studio, Sweet 16 in Rochdale, to do some further recording, because by this point Brendan O'Hare had joined the band, and there were a couple of tracks that we weren't entirely happy with, and so we went down there and recorded some extra tracks, and that became the first album. And I showed you a poster earlier, which obviously people are listening to this and can't see it, but it's the poster of the very first Matador event. And it was the event that launched the label. And it was a show at CBGB, that was actually our first show in the US, so it was pretty amazing. And the first time that we met, the night before we met Yola Tango, the first time, we're still good friends with them. We met Superchunk that night, who are our label now, Merge Records. They were on the bill that evening, so it was quite a big night for us, and in terms of our history.
Urge Overkill, I saw it was on there as well.
Urge Overkill were special guests. They weren't on Matador, but they were special guests. So yeah, we met those guys that night too. So it was amazing, actually, and it was the first time that any of us had been to the US and New York City. So and what a place to play on your first show, CBGB.
And still was at the time. By the time I got to New York, it was kind of a shell of its former self. But I'm assuming at that point there was still the punk part had long since moved on, but there was probably still some kind of Lower East Side energy.
Yeah. There definitely was. It was pretty grimy down there at that time. I remember the one of the things that stuck in my mind about the CBGB is the washroom downstairs, the men's washroom or whatever. They had yours, but there was like a toilet sitting in the kind of middle of just in the middle of the room there. Okay.
There was a stall, but somebody had ripped the door off of it.
Yeah, that's right. That's what had happened. So I think it had all gone by that point. It was just kind of exposed.
I mean, it's funny because by the time I got there, it was probably 20 years after that, and that they just opted not to fix the stall.
That's the way it is. I think that was kind of the way that it went with CBG, was it just kind of gradually over the years just sort of deteriorated and until, of course, eventually it was gone. And it's amazing going down there now because it's, it's unrecognisable. But that's what happens, that's what happens in big cities. I think about London, and when we were going down there at first, Denmark Street is the really famous music street in London. All the music shops were there, and they're all gone now. There's nothing there. It's and that was a big part. I used to be really excited about going, about visiting. Get really excited about visiting Denmark Street when we were in London because, I would think this is where Pete Townsend bought his Rickenbacker, and you get to all these old stores. Rod Argent had a store there. It was amazing. But it's all gone now. So, just happened. Gentrification and things change.
As you said, you were touring with the Pastels, but it sounds like once you got it, the group of you got it in your heads to start doing Teenage Fanclub, that things picked up pretty quickly.
Yeah, they did. I guess, it was through circumstance, really, and good fortune. The fact that I knew Stephen and had toured with the Pastels meant that he would be the first person that I gave the cassette of the album to, and he knew Gerard and he knew Calvin Johnson, and so I met Calvin Johnson through that. And then Stephen also passed the cassette on to a guy called Dave Barker in London, who was starting a label called Paperhouse, and Dave had put out the Pastels album up for a bit on his Glass label, so it all came together pretty quickly for us. Stephen being a major factor in all of this happening. And then at that point, we just started touring. We just, got in the back of a transit van they have over here. I think we just got the mattress off of my bed, chucked it in the back, and off we went. No windows. So if you were lucky, you got to ride up front with the driver. But if you were unlucky, you just had to lie on the mattress somewhere and close your eyes and wait till you got to the other side. A couple of hours later.
It's a really good way to figure out if you like a group of people.
Well, yes, it certainly is. Yeah, I mean, but it was a lot of fun, and it was that I think a lot at that time. I mentioned people would be looking for big record deals, and we weren't expecting to get. We weren't looking for that. We weren't expecting anything like that. So we did it. It did start, like I say, in the back of a van, and we were just getting gigs left, right, and centre wherever we could. We did a big European tour in the back of a van, but we played all sorts of crazy places. We were playing in a gas tank, in Switzerland, so like one of those, something that would store gas, and the echo in there, the reverb in there was insane. But we played all sorts of places, and actually in the US too, we did that. We did a little East Coast tour. Went up to Boston and Providence, and played a load of little shows there. It was all, and someone actually at that time, someone who had worked at Homestead, a guy called Ken, I've forgotten Ken's second name, and he lent us an old vehicle that he had. Now, remember, we picked it up in Manhattan, and we got to the vehicle with him, and he opened the trunk, and he pulled out a couple of different plates, and he said, "I better change these," and he changed the plates on the car, and we're like, okay. And then I remember we got into it. It was a really nice old car. I don't know the model, but it was like an old Chevy or something like that. And there was a big hole in the passenger side floor, so you could see the highway going, literally going under your feet or whatever, And it was amazing. And it was one of those things where we show up, like I say, playing in tiny little bars. And at the end of the show, I would invariably say, is there anyone here that could put us up tonight? And there'd always be something like, yep, could stay with us. And so we met some cool people doing that. People that we're still friends with, actually. There's a guy called Eric Van Rysdom, who's from Buffalo. And when the first time we went to New York City, we stayed with him and his friend Peter, Pete, another good friend of ours, and we still know them. So it's amazing, really.
I think about this a lot, and it's funny that we were talking about CBGBs because, again, I'm in New York, and I moved out here to be a writer, and my first, like probably most people, my first several years in the city. I was not making a lot of money, and I was living in really rough neighborhoods. And by a lot of measures, my life was kind of miserable. But I did at the time, I to a certain degree, I did romanticize it, being a struggling writer. And certainly in hindsight, there are aspects of it that I do remember quite fondly. And you kind of push those bad things out of your mind. And I'm wondering, in this case, when you're, in some of these sticky situations, or you're driving in a car with a giant hole where you could see the road, if there was that sense of that romance that was keeping you going.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you're kind of fearless when you're young anyway. You'll kind of go for anything, But yeah, we were big fans of Sonic Youth as well, and a lot of music that we liked was music from the US, and so I guess all of us had always sort of like everyone does, I suppose like you did, you sort of romanticized about moving to New York or being in New York City or experiencing that. I mean, the smell in that city is quite distinctive and unique, but for better or for worse. But it's amazing though. Just it's in Manhattan. It's just something else. It's the plumes of smoke coming out of the sidewalk or whatever in the middle of the road or whatever. All of that kind of stuff. Yeah, it really is, and back then especially too. You had all those little sort of Korean stores, which seem to be mostly gone now. All of that is kind of gone. A lot of those little sort of mini market stores.
The bodegas are still around. Maybe they're not as Korean as they used to be. It's a lot of Latin American people primarily, but that's still a big part. Less so in Manhattan. I live in Queens, and the outer boroughs are still very much a fixture on every block.
So that was all stuff that I was aware of through watching things like Midnight Cowboy or whatever. That is that vision of New York then. I mean, it's probably fairly accurate as well, because New York in the 60s, city in the 60s. And I do remember Giuliani cleaning it all up, or, trying to clean it up. And it was amazing. It was a great, I mean, it still is a great city, but like I say, you probably do have to move out to Queens and other places to experience that, because a lot of the Manhattan and down in Soho, I thought the gentrification there is pretty crazy, unrecognizable, really.
It's funny because I completely understand and I can relate to what you're saying about Midnight Cowboy, but also Midnight Cowboy is such a miserable, grimy movie. I mean, Dustin Hoffman's character is dying of consumption or something the entire time. It's funny to romanticize that kind of film.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's I don't know. It's I guess it's. You think what was happening. I mean, you think of actually. You're talking about it being a bit grimy and a bit grim. I think the Velvet Underground, their aesthetic. I mean, Lou Reed's vision of the world at that time is pretty. It's pretty grimy and grim. It would be. I mean, it would have been a tough city to be poor in, particularly there. I mean, it's never. It's never a good time to be poor in a big city, but I think it would have been extra tough then. But like I say, it was an amazing experience for us to be there for the first time. To cross into. And we didn't have a lot of money at all. We stayed on the office floor at Matador. We used the building's sort of washroom. So the communal washroom for all the different offices that were people that were working there, that was basically our hotel bathroom, whatever. We'd wake up, we would be sleeping we were in sleeping bags on the floor in the Matador office. We'd wake up, they'd go through and, do what we had to do in the communal washroom for the whole building. And that's how we stayed for the first few days of our time in New York City. It's right down at the corner of Houston and Broadway. Where their office was at the time. I don't know where they are now. I would imagine they're not there anymore. But
that's not far from CBGB's. That's only a few blocks.
Yeah, it was pretty good. You could walk over, so that was pretty handy. But it was a really exciting time, and like we had. But it's funny because Joe Pernice is a good friend of mine, and he, in the way that I think I'm probably what is the word for it? Is it an Americanophile or whatever? I mean, I really like US culture. I always have, and. Joe loves British culture. He finds it romantic thinking about what's going on here and being in London and all of that kind of stuff. So I guess it's something that's exotic, isn't it? something about that. I mean, I've read Paul Auster's books as well, so I'm thinking walking around Manhattan and thinking about him, and yeah, I mean, amazing, really, really good times.
It is a beautiful cultural exchange, like especially in rock music, the way that seemed to keep going back and forth.
For sure, yeah, definitely. There's no doubt about it, yeah. I mean, you think The Who and all that kind of stuff, but they're playing American instruments and amps. Oh, actually, Vox amps, so, whatever. But, yeah, there's a mixture of both. But we tend to use American guitars. I think all our guitars are probably, they are, yeah, Gibsons and Fenders, Leo Fender famously couldn't play the guitar. I don't know if you know that, but he was not a guitar player, which I think's incredible that he couldn't play the guitar.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Les Paul shortly before he died.
Yeah, wow! And
he was an incredible guitar player, and he had a similar issue as Django Reinhardt, where he had lost a movement in one of his hands and had to reinvent the way he played because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's an amazing person too. Kind of one of the inventors of multi-track recording, and actually, so Raymond from the band that saw Les Paul play in New York way, way back. One of the first times we went there.
There was a place called Starlight. He used to have a residency there, and it was this thing of, I think about this a lot with regard to a lot of musicians where we take people for granted when they're around. Yeah. Les Paul was playing like every week, and there weren't a ton of people there. And obviously now that he's been gone for a while, people would, give their right arm to see him.
You're absolutely right. I agree with you totally. It's funny, actually, because recently, I went to see Elton John play recently. I wouldn't say I've ever been a big Elton John fan. I mean, nothing against him at all, but I just wasn't a person that was really, really into Elton John. But about a month ago, a friend, Anne-Marie, she said to me, I've got tickets to see Elton John in Glasgow tomorrow. Would you like to go? And I was thinking, what the fuck am I doing? Of course, yeah, I'll see you there. And it was amazing. And actually, we discussed. So he played Glastonbury a few nights later, which is supposedly his last ever live show. But the Glasgow show, he said, look, this is the last show of my own that I'm ever doing. And you think, that is amazing. This is his last Elton John. And it was a great show, actually. He was really good. I was really impressed. His singing was great. And one thing I really liked is that he wasn't, loads of bands that used in-ear monitors, but Elton didn't. He had like a couple of old school monitors around his, so that was great. But yeah, it's really always worth seeing a great or a big artist, or to be that successful, you must have something about you, right? And
I am a huge Elton John fan, and I saw him. I also got an invite to see him. I lucked into very good tickets. So sitting directly behind Michael Stipe at Madison Square Garden. Wow, yes. And it was absolutely incredible. And I think that it's one of those moments where even if you're not a big fan, being there, maybe suddenly it all kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Why he's revered the way he is.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing, actually. And like I said, I do like him. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not an uber fan, but I thought the show was incredible. I thought the band were great. And I loved that they were all looking at each other, and I thought, this is a proper band, he's a proper player, he's into the band thing, and and I guess a lot of the guys in the band have been with him for a long, long time. But it was great. It was really impressive. I really enjoyed it.
Knowing what I know about him, that's a situation where you really have to love playing with him, because I don't think he is a particularly easy person to be in a band with.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. But yeah. But they seem to have they did seem to have good on-stage, interaction. So, it's something.
The reason why I sort of made reference to this when we were talking about, touring, like packing yourself into the back of a van, it strikes me that not only has Teenage Fanclub been around contiguously for a really long time, but that it's like more or less the same core group of guys, the same 3 or 4 guys. You have to like each other. You have to enjoy spending time with each other.
No, I think that's always been a big part of our thing. I think if we didn't enjoy each other's company, that's not to say that we don't really hang out outside of the band. We're all in good terms. We've never been a band that enjoy sort of conflict or tension in the studio. It's not the way we operate. I think that wouldn't work well for us at all. Some people like that. Some people like to, have tension and conflict. But no, we like. I think our relationship is, in terms of the group of people, is about there's never any drama. There's no confrontation at all. Really, we try to just work together. It's not our style, really. There aren't any personalities like that in the band. Most people are everyone is easygoing. So that's how we've always been. It's just the dynamic that we have as a group of individuals. Other people have different dynamics, but I would not find it conducive to being productive if there was tension like that in the band. I wouldn't enjoy that at all.
Even bringing Francis back after he played with you for like a year in the late 80s, him coming back decades later is pretty wild. Was he just in your orbit the entire time?
He kind of was, yeah. I mean, so when we made the first record, Francis was decided to go to university. Fair enough. He thought, listen, guys, I'm going to go to uni.
You took a really long shot bet being in a rock band.
Yeah, exactly. So he thought, I'll go to uni and whatever. So he went off and did that. Then along came Brendan, and we worked with him for a while. And then Paul Quinn joined the band after Brendan, and we worked with Paul for a few albums, and then Paul left. And then Francis, in the interim period, had been playing with BMX Bandits and making records. And had started his own label, putting out Laura Cantrell's records on his Shoeshine label. So he knows Laura, and he'd been doing that. So when we came to look for someone to, play drums on our next record, we thought, well, why don't we ask Francis? I mean, he knows everyone, and he sort of knows the ropes. And he just came back in, and it's funny because he's probably been back in the band for 20 years or something like that.
That's fun, yeah. And he's still like the new guy in a way.
Well, Dave McGowan's the new guy. He was the new guy, Dave, and David. But Dave's been with us for 15 years or something. We've now got Eros Childs with us, who plays with us now, and Eros has been in for 5 years now, I think. So. Time moves quickly in bands,
It is an interesting thing, and I've noticed this, like the way that we talk about bands, but also that just applies to life in general. But those early years in the bands, those first few records are often, I mean, for obvious reasons, they're so important that there's just a different sense of time when you get older. Yeah, there is. I mean, if you look at the trajectory of most bands, and we're not dissimilar to this, is that you start out making albums fairly frequently. So I think we had an album out every year and a half for the first 3 or 4 records. Then that becomes 2.5, 3 years, and eventually there's 5 years between albums. So there's just something inevitable in that you just seem to you have this initial trajectory, and then it just seems to tail off or whatever. But we're trying to change that, because the older we get, the closer we get to the end of our lives or whatever. Not to be melodramatic, but it's a fact. Is that we're kind of thinking, why are we dicking about? Why we should just be making LPs or touring? So that's what we're trying to do now. We're going to, we've got this album coming out in September, October, and we plan to try and get another one out 2 years later. If we can get an album out every 2 years, that would be ideal. And in in between that, we can tour the record. But our kind of mindset now is that why don't we just try and do that? Because what else are we going to do? This is what we do. So we should get proactive. Not only that, but obviously no one lives forever. But even before that point, there's a certain point where your body can't be on tour for 100 dates a year.
Yeah. And the other thing about this too is there's no reason that, I mean, people can be creative at any age. You can keep writing. I guess authors and people will still be writing books well into old age or whatever. There's no reason you can't write music. Until you're into your later years or whatever. I guess it's about finding things to write about. But there's always something to write about. We all have different experiences in life, and things change, and and mostly for us though, it's a lot of fun. We still love making records. It's really as exciting to get that test pressing in your hand as it was the first time. Wow, there it is. Or get that finished vinyl. There's the finished record. Wow, we made that. Amazing. But yeah, we're just going to try and keep working as much as we can. I always think Yola Tango have been really great at that. They'll make an album, they'll go on tour, they'll make another album.
And they're always good somehow.
Yeah, they're really good. Well, I think because they love it. They're great. They're really talented people, right? But but they enjoy it. There's, they enjoy it, and it is who they are. As individual peoples. Ira, George, and James. That's part of them is the band, and but yeah, I mean, so that as a template, I think how they have done it is really good.
I think you use the word melodramatic, but it's interesting because I've read some of the things that you've said about this record, and I don't like doing this. I don't like talking about song titles or album titles, but I have to ask you whether the phrase "nothing lasts forever," does that have a positive or negative implication?
I think. Well, I guess a band calling an LP "Nothing Lasts Forever," the inference from that would be, "Oh, this must be the last record." But that's not what we mean by it at all. We're talking about it. So that's actually a lyric in a song from the last LP. But I think Raymond came up with or suggested the title. We got chatting about it, and I kind of started to get a bit metaphysical about it. And we were kind of, nothing lasts forever. Nothing literally. Like the vinyl won't last forever. None of us will last. Nothing lasts forever. But it's fine. It's okay. It's just a statement of fact. But we also like the idea of, we've also thought about, here we are, all this time later. And after making the first record, we kind of thought, okay, well, it'd be great if we can make another one, but who knows what's going to happen? Maybe we won't. So, but here we are, how many albums, so many albums later that I can't remember how many it is, that we're still making records. So I guess, it's definitely... It's got nothing to do with us not planning to make another record, because we fully plan to make one. But we just like the idea of like I say, and it's a kind of ridiculous thing. Of course, you have to come up with an album title. You have to come up with a name for the body of songs, the group of songs, and so yeah. There's nothing too deep in it at all. But we just kind of thought it sounded funny, and also, I guess, yeah, you can take it completely literally that nothing lasts from the computer. There's all this stuff that we're using to record this, that's going to be gone as well. And that's all fine. It's all good, it's all okay.
That's a good attitude. It takes people, not everybody arrives at that. It's nice when you do come to terms with that fact and not only understand it, but accept it.
Yeah. Well, we've got a thing too. We always think that, bands very often take themselves far too seriously. You think about us, Teenage Fanclub, how many people are even aware of us? Like in terms of the global population, infinitesimally small. We can kind of generally, meaningless to and unknown to the vast majority of people on this planet. That we're cool with that. That's absolutely fine, because of course that's just the way it is. It's okay, But I don't even know where I was going with that. But it's a thing that we talk about.
That's interesting, because we were talking about trajectory earlier, and the band has had an interesting trajectory in terms of, I want to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say it was Bandwagon-esque. I want to say it was the third LP that really put the band on the map, and then I guess from sort of a critical and maybe sales standpoint, the follow-up less so.
Oh, yeah, definitely tailed off from there. Yeah, that was the.
But then you kind of got you got that mojo back on the following one.
Sure, yeah. We kind of leveled up. We've sort of leveled. And we do fine. We have a fan base. We've been really lucky that people have continued to buy the albums. But yeah, that was, I guess, when we made the Bandwagon records, there were high hopes at Geffen, at DGC, that this we were going to do really well with it. But I mean, that was all a bit surreal to us. We had no expectation at all. We were just happy to make the record. And so, of course, that didn't happen. We didn't become global superstars. But that's all fine. Like I said, we had no expectation of that at all. So we weren't disappointed because we didn't expect anything. We were just happy to be out making music. And, yeah, I guess that to us, that's an achievement in a way that we're still around doing it. But
There's a good chance that if you had that success, that you wouldn't be. Most of the bands that hit that plateau break up pretty quickly.
Yeah, they do. And, I remember we toured with Nirvana on the European leg of the Nevermind tour, and it was an amazing phenomenon to be a witness to, and maybe a peripheral part of it. It was a lot of fun, and they're great guys, they were great guys, and Dave Grohl and Chris, they're still great guys. Unfortunately, Kurt is no longer around. But I remember that time witnessing that phenomenon, seeing it just mushroom and become this massive thing, and also seeing how little they enjoyed that. They weren't really enjoying I think especially Kurt wasn't.
I feel like Dave probably came to terms with that pretty quickly.
I think Dave, because I think people, you think about Dave Grohl, and he is a great guy. Dave Grohl is a lovely guy. We did some shows with him fairly recently. Dave asked us to come and play some shows with him, and which was really nice. But he's kind of still the same guy he was then. He's really, and that, like, what you see is what you get with Dave Grohl. He's like that, that persona is him, that public persona is the private one as well. But what I think's amazing about what he's done is that, it wasn't a given that he would come out of Nirvana and become a big star. He did all that himself. All of that is his own work, it's kind of, the Nirvana part of it is really tiny,
because he was the drummer, and that never happens to the drummer.
Yeah, but big bands break up, and it's very, it's not given that the people who leave, the people from that band will go on to have success, and he's done amazingly well, and he deserves all the successes. He works hard. But at the time, though, it was a different experience for him. I don't think they were really ready for it, and didn't enjoy it, because you sort of lose something going to those big stadiums, not that we get to play them very often, but I still much prefer club shows. They're always the most exciting because you're kind of part of it. Then you're connected to the audience in a way that you're not at a big show. There's the pit. And then there's just the vast sea of faces, and you lose any sense of intimacy. But when you're in a club, you can see the sweat dripping off people's, foreheads.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about Nirvana because I guess they were your label mates at the time.
Yeah, they were, yeah.
A very famous part of the Teenage Fanclub lore is bandwagon-esque beating out Nevermind in that spin pole.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think about my life a lot in terms of these sorts of these crossroads, these moments where something could have gone in one direction or another. Obviously, the two bands took very different trajectories, and Nirvana's ended very unfortunately. How much of this sort of positive view that you have of your ultimate outcome is the kind of thing that comes with age? I'm trying to, in my own life, I'm trying to get better at being happy for people and not feeling this just intense sense of jealousy when other people succeed.
Yeah, there's kind of nothing you can do about what's going to happen, how your record's going to be received, and how actual people are going to, what they're going to think of it. I remember the Spin, we got the Spin album of the year, but the reviews editor at that time at Spin magazine was a guy called Stephen Daly, who was the drummer in Orange Juice from Glasgow. So I don't know if Stephen had some kind of influence on that.
You Scottish people stick together.
Yeah. He assures me he didn't. But no, it's like, and I think we've always felt happy that we've been able to make albums. We didn't have any expectation. I think at the time when DGC thought that we were going to be really big, we just didn't think that was going to be possible. I don't know. Just maybe the aesthetic of the music or whatever. We just couldn't see that being, really big. Nirvana had a kind of rock thing going on. They could cross over to that audience in a way. The sort of big power chords, and we didn't have anything like that. I suppose it was. But like I say, there's no point in analysing it. There's no who can say what's going to become popular. Some things do and other things don't, and it's difficult to say which one will be popular. There are two different things. But like so we've been very lucky that we're still touring, and we're going to Japan next year and Australia, and yeah, like I said, to be able to do that 30 years after we made our first record, it's amazing, really incredible. And we'll play clubs, and the shows will be great. We can make that work, and that will, hopefully make enough money to, make another album out of all the touring that we're doing, and we'll continue the sort of our trajectory.
When something like 13, when an album like 13 comes along and it doesn't have, I'm assuming doesn't have the reception that you were hoping for, certainly like not the kind that the albums before or after had, are there any conversations about, does it make sense to keep going? Were there ever any moments in your very long history when it felt like Teenage Fanclub might not continue to be a thing?
No, not at all, because I think we only ever wanted to make records. That was, we didn't want to be. We would like a lot of people to buy the records and like our music. Of course, you would. That's why in some ways, you make music. But just the fact of making them was the most important thing to us. And like I said, we did okay, even with with 13, the album. Looking back on it, was actually fairly well received. We've been pretty lucky in terms of reviews over the years, but it still allowed us to go and tour the world, and it still allowed us to make another album and do another deal. We've always kind of been very lucky in that we were in DGC in the US, Creation Records here. That deal came to an end. And in the US, we moved to Merge because we had a previous relationship with them as individuals and as a band with the Superchunk folk. And then here we sort of went solo in a way, started putting our own records out, hooked up with a company called Republic of Music who do all the kind of background work for us. So, like I say, we're just happy to still be able to make records, and it's still exciting. Putting together the artwork and talking about it and arranging tours. It's all a lot of fun. So, but I don't think we ever thought, hey, look, we're not, I think with bands, it is peaks and troughs. You'll have periods where you'll go out and tour and there'll be a lot of people there, and then you'll go out and tour a couple of years later. There won't be quite so many there, but that's just how it works. And if you're happy to accept that, then it's fine, But like I say, we've got no expectation of how this album will be received, but we'll do our best to make it a good record, and we'll definitely make sure that we're happy with it before we put it out, But how other people, what they think of it, then it's not up to us at all. We just, we just have to wait and see what people say. But so far, so good.
It's again mostly been the same core group of guys, which is really impressive. But what happens? What happens in the case of Gerard leaving the band, for example? I mean, what does that do to the band's future?
Well, we I didn't really do anything in terms of the band's future. We had kind of a bit of a disagreement about some live shows. I mean, a long time. It's 5 years ago since Jerry's been in the band. But so he decided he would leave the band. But we thought, well, we're just going to keep making music. I mean, the band when the band started, there was me and Raymond sitting in his little flat in Glasgow with a sort of porta studio or whatever, and so what you do is you just accept a new dynamic and you move on. Dave, who'd been playing keyboards and guitar with the band, is primarily a bass player. He plays bass with Bell and Sebastian. Moved on to bass. We thought, okay, well, let's just go out and, keep working and make another record. It's only a band. People have left before and things have changed, and it's all been okay. And this will be fine. It'll be what it is. It'll be different, but that's okay. The band, I mean, it was great that when Jerry was in the band, it was great. And, I'd look to my left and there would be Jerry and that was all good. And now Dave's there and Eros is playing keyboards. I still enjoy it. It's still great. It's just different,
I partially ask because I don't remember if it was you or Raymond in the press material. Every single band that's been that I've talked to that's had any longevity has described this almost, again, I'll get metaphysical now. This like psychic connection that people have when they get into the studio of just understanding, in your case, what the guy coming in, with the song is trying to do, versus giving like very strict instructions, which maybe was the dynamic in the early days. Obviously, on those few occasions when new people have come and gone, that does change things. It changes the chemistry somewhat.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. But you have to kind of embrace that and just accept it. But I think it was, I said what you just said there about the dynamic in the studio. So speaking personally, when I was younger, I would definitely try and dictate things. You would have an idea for a song, and you would think, okay, well, the bass should maybe do something like this, and another guitar could play this part, and you would try and direct people. I mean, even down to drum fills, you could maybe play this drum fill at this point in the song, and I don't do that at all now, because the people I'm working with are really talented and have really good ideas, and I'm not that precious about it. I can write the song. Okay, I've written the song. There's the song. There are the lyrics, and here are the chords, and this is a rough arrangement. But let's start playing it together. So what we do is, and we both do this, myself and Raymond, we'll come into the studio. We don't do any pre-production or rehearsals or any of that stuff. We go into the studio, we set up in the room together, so if it was me, I would come in and say, okay, here's the song, there's the verse, there's the chorus, and we'll just start playing it over and over, and Dave will work out a bass part, Francis works out drums, Eros works out keyboards, and Raymond does a guitar thing, and then between us, after a couple of hours, we'll have something, and then we'll get some takes of that, and that's it. And that's how we do it now. And I really enjoy working that way because it can take the song in a different direction. You still have the melody. The melody's still there. You just kind of, what you're doing is working on an arrangement of a melody, and you can change the structure. But people always come in with really interesting ideas, and also kind of homogenizes everything and brings it all together. And across the whole album, because we're all contributing to the writing in a way, there'll be the person who will come up with the melody and the chords, but everyone else is contributing something. So, but yeah, that's just the way we do it now. There's no magic in a way. Nobody thinks they're Brian Wilson, and they have to kind of, not that there's anything wrong with that. Some people do that, and it's and the results can be incredible. So, but
again, it didn't end great for Brian Wilson.
No, it didn't at all. No, just yeah. But that, so yeah, exactly. But that's our dynamic. But every group is a different dynamic, and you have to get to the end of the process of making the record. You just have to adapt and work in the with us with the group of people that are there in that room. That's how we do it. We'll all be in the same room. We don't baffle things off. We'll not have people in different rooms. We're all in the same room. And we're looking at each other, and that's how we do it.
Am I wrong in thinking that there's a sense in which Foreign Land came together in a very similar way as the concept?
Yeah, well, it did actually. It was written in the studio, so we'd been, and actually because the studio, when you're in the studio, it's also conducive to writing. It really is, because you're kind of in that, But I think we'd been recording for a couple of days, and I just sat one afternoon or whatever, come up with the riff, and I thought, okay, I could maybe make a song out of that, and then so maybe we'll try that tomorrow morning. So we went in the next day to the studio, into the room, and I said, okay, I've got this idea. And I think it's called Foreign Land, and I've got some fragments of lyrics, and then it quickly came together. So yeah, so that song wouldn't have existed without us being in the studio. I didn't sit and write that at home before we were in there, and we tend to not go in with finished material, finished songs when we get into the studio. So which can be slightly nerve wracking, and there's always a danger that you won't get it done. We always have. But there is a slight element of danger in that you may not be able to complete everything. But we kind of like that. We find that conducive to producing good work.
An interesting part of the alchemy, and again, this is something that I hear from a lot of bands, is once you've got this group of songs together, all of a sudden, like doesn't occur to you at all during the writing process generally, but once they're all juxtaposed up against each other, you start to pick out the themes that you were sort of subconsciously writing. And for me, the title of the album is interesting. Not, I didn't think at all that there was any possibility the band was breaking up anytime soon, especially, again, having heard you talk, previously. You're obviously very happy with what you do, and the band continues to produce really great records. But to me, there's something in Nothing Lasts Forever that touches on some of the unexpected themes of the record. And I'm going to quote you at yourself. And I keep pulling from the press releases, which I don't do, but this is probably a testament to how good our friend Caroline is at her job, that it was full of a lot of these jabs. You're talking about light. You're talking about light as one as a metaphor for hope, which obviously, like breaking through the clouds, we all understand that. And then there's a turn in the sentence where you say, as an ultimate destination further down the road. And to me, that speaks to this theme of mortality that is very present on this album.
Yeah. Well, as you get older, that becomes a bigger thing in your life. You do get closer to the end of your life, but it's like I guess we're just happy to talk about it. Some people don't like to talk about it. Some people like to just, but I suppose inevitably too, if you're writing music about, so we write from our life experience, myself and Raymond, we don't write sort of little narrative songs or whatever, and it's in the way that the concept is maybe just a little story that I made up or whatever, but we tend to write about the world, our life, our place in it, and how we experience it or whatever, and so inevitably you're kind of I think I mentioned in the press release, or maybe the UK one, but you find yourself putting on the black suit and tie more often than...
The quote was pulling the black suit out of the cupboard.
Yeah, and that's just a fact. That happens a bit more often than it did when you're in your 20s or your 30s. So that's why you might want to explore the mortality and the world and your place in it, and it's because it's something you think about a bit more often than you did when you were younger, because it's getting closer.
I implicitly understand that, but I also very much understand why people don't like talking about it. I certainly don't like talking about it. No, I get it too. It's funny, and there's some ironies because my dad, he's going to be 90 fairly soon, and he would look at me and think, "What the fuck are you talking about?" You're only 57. But, it's like, it's all relative, isn't it? Because, I was talking to somebody the other day and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm so old. And I was like, oh, this person is 20 years older than me. You shouldn't say that to somebody. It doesn't make them feel great about themselves. Yeah, it's just a funny thing. You always have that. Everyone feels old. People feel old when they're 17, It's just, I guess that's part of life, and, and people actually probably even thinking about mortality when they're young. You just don't do it as often, and you can kick it into long grass because you don't have to think about it. Then, well, I'll be fine. I'm probably going to be okay for the next few years, so I wouldn't think about that too much. But as you go older, it's something you think about more. Again, Nothing Lasts Forever. Again, I think is a good way to look at some of these ideas. It's not intended to be in any way morbid at all. It's but yeah, just like I said, nothing does last forever. We all kind of have to come to terms with the inevitability of what will happen. But here's the thing: I think we are positive people too. I mean, I've been out fixing up my garden. I don't want to get all Chauncey Gardner being here, but if you you've been outside of your house, so you won't fall prey to that. Yeah, there you go. Wasn't he like he was like born in the house, right? It's amazing book, but the movie's great. The last scene in the movie where he just walks out onto the water is totally brilliant. Onto the lake is really amazing. I remember the first time I watched that, and then I immediately read his book and all of the other books. But I don't know why that isn't something that has cultural purchase. Yeah, in the way other films do. It seems to be forgotten, which is tragic. It does. It's kind of lost, isn't it, a little bit? But maybe because people maybe found it a little hard to relate to, or a lot of people might find it hard to relate to because it's a bit strange, the whole Chauncey Gardner thing, and and Peter Sellers doing a very wonderful dramatic role, but I assume that probably threw some people off at the time.
Yeah, definitely. They're looking for something that's a bit funnier, and it is funny, but it's very dark as well, But yeah, great movie. But again, I suppose that's talking about death and life and whatever, Yeah, I get. Like I said, we just try to write about the world and how we experience it, and that thoughts of mortality will certainly be in your head more often than they were when you were younger.
These things that we're talking about right now, mortality, death, obviously throughout your career, knowing what I know about you, you've used music as a form of, to a certain extent, catharsis, but also as a way of processing some of these ideas. Grief obviously is a big one here. In writing this album, and in whether consciously or unconsciously touching on these topics, did it impact your view and the way you process some of these ideas?
I think so, because there's a bit of self-analysis going on. If I wasn't writing the songs, I probably wouldn't be thinking about the mortality and in the way that I was, or on our last album, when we made our last album, I'd split up with my wife, and a lot of the songs on that record were about that and me coming to terms with that. I'm happy to. It's all good now. We have a great relationship now, and it's all in the past, and I've kind of processed it. But making the record helped me do that. Allowed me to just go through how I was feeling and put it into words, and I suppose in a very public way through the lyrics on that record. And so the lyrics in this record are about me and how post that. I'm in a new home. I'm kind of in a new phase of my life, and so I'm feeling fairly positive actually. Generally, about things, So making the records and making music has given me an opportunity to process these things. It's kind of like personal therapy, It's a lot cheaper than going to a therapist. But I probably wouldn't be thinking about mortality or, in the same way if I hadn't been making the record. I think most of us in life kind of just, trundle along. We have a kind of a routine that we go through, which is good. I kind of like a bit of routine myself, but most of the time we're not really thinking about down the line. We're just kind of living each day as it comes, which is pretty good. It's a nice way to live life. But sometimes you do have to kind of think about what's in front of you. But yeah, most of the time I don't either. Most of the time, I'm just sort of getting on with my life, buying mulch and that kind of thing, and and compost. And that's my new thing. I've gone all Chauncey Gardner.